Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. We are breaking down Treasure Series 8 by Ka0s this weekend. It is a good return to the online tournament scenes. I haven't really jumped in and covered one of these the week they happened in a hot minute, but I also had to cover this one as I participated in this one. Made the top 16. We'll talk about my deck later. I was able to end the Swiss in first place, but unfortunately lost in the top 16. Let's break down this top 16 here today though, but before we do, I want to remind you, while you're here on YouTube, hit that like button and that subscribe button as it helps out the channel a ton. Also, while you're here on YouTube, consider checking in the description to find the link to our Patreon here for Comedian MTG. All of those folks who helps out on the Patreon are the reason that we can continue to do this full time. So everyone who helps out is the reason we've had multiple videos for weeks now, and it's truly an amazing opportunity, and I can't thank everybody who's on there enough. And we'll talk a little bit more about cEDH coaching later in this video. We have Silver Lining here with He Who Must Not Be Named. This is a Corvold Fakehurst King turbo deck. The idea behind Corvold lists in general is to get your Corvold out as quickly as possible, usually resolving a spell like Ad Nauseam. However, this version of Corvold is not quite running those normal lines. So if you check down here in the instance of this deck, there is no Ad Nauseam in this Corvold list. This list is much more into the sort of Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar, Goblin Bombardment sort of combos with this deck. I know there's Zombie Infestation in this list specifically, and I, for the life of me, cannot tell you why that is included in this Corvold variant. I have actually never seen a Corvold like this, even though I did get to play against our Corvold player in the top 16. However, they really didn't have a hand that was doing a lot for them during our match, so didn't really get to see them do a whole ton. But I know for a fact that Pitiless Plunder and Chatterfang and a couple other of these types of cards are all sort of loop into each other in intricate combos. And I know Pitiless Plunder is specifically, and a number of these things that sort of make tokens when they die or create tokens, etc., are able to draw your entire deck with Corvold with some of the sack outlets that we were just looking at below. So definitely a very atypical take on Corvold. Corvold is normally just associated once again with the pure turbo deck, but this version kind of being like a Jund creature sacrifice combo variant of this archetype. So congrats to our pilot for taking a rather atypical Corvold build. And if anyone knows why Zombie Infestation is in this deck, please put it in the comments down below because I am insanely curious. We have Spany with just another Teamer Pirates, another player I played in the Swiss of this tournament. Teamer Pirates, pretty classic stuff here. Nothing too crazy to say about this archetype. The idea of this deck is to have your Malcolm and be able to get your Glinthorn Buccaneer as quickly as possible. This variant definitely leans a bit more towards some of the innovations we saw from Vasher's Malcolm Teamer list, from Corridor Monitor to Kiki combos, and making it a little bit more explosive using cards like Warrior's Oath, Last Chance, and Final Fortune to really be able to capitalize on the tempo of the game. Even playing cards like Daze to be able to really get your opponents and make sure that this Malcolm Pirates list is super lean, super low to the ground, and one that is able to win at a very, very quick rate. You are consistently going to see these turn 2, turn 3 Malcolm plus Glinthorn attempts. And when we played in the pod against our player here, we definitely saw that happening. We have Razan with the King Ping. This is a Ob Nixilis captive Kingpin list that we've definitely talked about before, because I definitely remember saying the name the King Ping. So good job for creating a mentally infectious deck name. This is an Ob Nixilis list, and if we check down here in the instance, it usually can tell us what kind of Ob Nixilis list we are looking at. Seeing cards like Fire Covenant and all of these 4-drops and the card like Fling, instead of seeing a card like Ad Nauseam, tells you exactly what kind of Ob Nixilis deck this is. We have actually Bolas's Citadel and Aetherflux Reservoir with top, so that's kind of one of our main wins in this deck. We also have a lot of synergy with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. I've heard some really, really potent stuff from Ob players about Agatha's, although I don't know the specific lines they go through, so if you know those, if you could throw them down in the comments below, they'd be pretty sick. There's also a lot of synergy with Cloudstone Curio, combine that with Dogside, Magda, Imperial Recruiter, and etc. And a lot of lines where you go through bouncing a bunch of your stuff to just ping your opponents to death and draw your entire deck out with Ob Nixilis. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in here. You know, you see your classic Cataract Parasites and your Voldaire and Epicures, all your ways to get your opponents pinged down so that they can so you can draw cards with your Ob Nixilis. There's a lot of cards doing that in this variant. I've also noticed a lot less triggered abilities from opponents in this variant of the deck. Much more of the, you know, I'm going to shoot you with a ballista. My enter the battlefield makes you lose 1 life. My artifacts coming in makes you lose 1 life. My non-creatures make you lose 1 life, right? Whereas I know other versions of Nixilis tend to play a few more stacksy pieces that react to what your opponents do as opposed to reacting to what you are doing. And then obviously all will be one great 1-card win con with Nixilis. cEDH Thada by Tom MTG. We have a Thada Adele deck here in this top 16. Thada basically, since the One Ring came out, has actually started showing up at cEDH tables, not in high volumes, but it's been showing up for sure. This is very like iconic mono blue control nonsense. This is kind of crazy. Now, one of the main combos to mention is that we have Mind Over Matter in this deck, which allows you to discard a card to untap artifact, creature, or land, or tap them, but mostly it works with the One Ring, which you can find here. The idea is that you tap One Ring, draw a card, then you discard that card to untap the One Ring. And then obviously as more counters get added to the One Ring, you're actually netting way more cards than you are discarding through that combo. We also have a ton of artifact synergy here, a bunch of untappers like Manifold, Key, Voltaic Key, etc., and a bunch of different cool artifacts. And we have Torpor Orb to really hate on some of the more powerful archetypes in the format right now, as well as Curse Totem and Grafdigger's Cage. So definitely a lot of ways to hate on, you know, some of the more popular creature strategies in the format and things like Breach, Dockside, Thoracle, all of that stuff. You know, I actually asked one of these Thada players how they win the game recently. And a lot of it seems to do with like making artificial loops with Hullbreaker Horror, drawing your entire deck, and then kind of figuring it out from there, it sounds like. I didn't really get a clear answer of like what you do from there, but I know if you draw your entire deck, you can just loop Nexus of Fate infinitely, take infinite turns, which I know is kind of a popular use for cards like that. There's a lot of twiddle effects in this deck, I've noticed, which is pretty sick. Definitely a rather out there deck to make the top 16 of this tournament, but you know, Thada Adele making mono blue control a thing in cEDH is pretty cool. And definitely an atypical list for sure. We have Thrasmi by Fervent Alchemist, Kai the Fervent Alchemist, a well-known player in the cEDH community, someone who's been known lately for playing Jeskai Narset, and I've been saying Kai's really found his stride with that list, but here he is playing Miara and Thrasios, and I believe he did a deck on his channel on this Miara list, but from what I understand, Miara is just kind of there to be a cheap, efficient partner. That's the most I've really gotten from Kai as far as answers to why Miara is in the deck, really getting your Fierce and your Rolix on when you don't have your Thrasios. This deck has combos for days. I mean, from what I understand of this list, it is mostly just proactive combos. How many can you shove in one deck? I'm looking at this time sieve here and racking my brain to why there's a time sieve in this deck. And I'm wondering if this is like some weird, I'm going to copy people's Tivits, but I don't even see a Tivit here. Kai, why is there a time sieve in your deck? I have no idea why there's a time sieve in this list. That's what? Someone who knows the answer to this question, please save me. I have no idea. Like, it's not like your Praetor's grasping someone's Tivit, right? It's their commander. I don't know, but otherwise, this is a very proactive list, right? We have Witherbloom and Chain of Smog combos. We have Thassa's plus Demonic Consultation. This deck is playing Dosan, and it is also playing Defense Grid. Very, very proactive, and a deck that is looking to try and just push the envelope to be as fast as possible. Playing like Mox Amber and Relic of Legends, really trying to maximize the fact that we have two very cheap 2-drop commanders in the command zone. Definitely an interesting take on a cEDH deck, kind of gets away with playing a low land count. It's very interesting. It kind of reminds me of what people are like trying to do with Thrasios Francisco stuff right now, but obviously with Miara instead of Francisco. So it's definitely a quirky deck. And this time sieve thing is genuinely going to bug me so much. Why is there a time sieve in this deck? I don't understand. We have Wounded Satellite here with his ever classic Grind Them Into Dust. Wounded, our Kinnan aficionado showing up, playing this Armor Scrap Forger version of Kinnan. It has become a thing now that I will just point this card out every single time because he tries and tries to get me to play this card and I refuse to. But when we last covered one of Max's decks, he was playing Trinisphere and had mentioned it was a newer include and has yet to cut it. So I'm assuming that it's doing pretty well for him. But yeah, Max is a very consistent Kinnan player and someone who is known for playing this deck. It is something he does pretty well with, at least making top 16 in several tournaments, definitely made top 4 or some other ones. So been putting up pretty consistent results with Kinnan. And if you've heard me talk about it on the Mind Sculptors, you know it's definitely in my top 3 decks in the format right now, and definitely what I feel very comfortable bringing to a tournament. So not surprised to see Max showing up tournament after tournament with a deck that he truly loves. We have Bane Slayer 88 with Sisay Super Friends cEDH. Bane Slayer here putting up another top 16 with Sisay. And you know, someone repping Sisay well at these tournaments. Bane Slayer has been showing up to mostly these Chaos tournaments. I think there's actually a little, mostly for online tournament scene and just doing really well with the Sisay deck. You know, some interesting choices here in playing the new Kite Sail Larcenist, basically a Grasp of Fate on a creature. It's a pretty cool card. Essica, always my 102nd Sisay card. I really wish I could play it or feel like I could play it in this deck, but I never do. Bowmasters, obviously strong, not played in every Sisay variant just because it's not legendary, but pretty strong, and also Gilded Drake as well. Just another one of those cards that's very good in the format, but not always played in Sisay specifically. LQR, Legolas's Quick Reflexes showing up for the first time in one of these breakdowns. This card is very, very good. Split Second is a broken ability, and you know, just in case your creature needed more than hexproof reach, it also has a removal spell attached to it after untapping. So this card is pretty sick. Our first showing of the new card Get Lost as well. This card is probably going to be making an impact in the format, and I've definitely already suggested a number of players put it in their decks. It's very, very flexible white removal. Kind of wild to see a 1 ring in this variant of Sisay, especially with not a ton of other ways to accelerate these cards out. But, you know, the 1 ring is a powerful, powerful card, and a lot of good decks can take advantage of it. Bird Attack, Ishai Ka0s, cEDH. This was a list I was not ready for, if I'm being honest. I saw Ka0s Ishai in this top 16 breakdown and immediately went, wait, what? Yeah, this is Ka0s and Ishai, with this Jessica just sitting here as a Planeswalker in the 99. This is Bird Murder, the deck. I don't know how to describe it other than that. I mean, there are actual straight up pump spells in this deck. I mean, you have cards like Savage Beating that gives you another combat and double strike on stuff. You have Teamer Battle Rage to slip in some damage. You have Slip Out the Back to, you know, protect your creature, give it a little counter. You have Seize the Day, giving a one of your creatures another combat for turn. And then you got sort of this like mid-range package here. Some disruptive pieces like Mind Sensor and Boromir. You have Spellskite to protect your giant bird, because that's clearly what this deck is doing. You have Giver of Runes and Mother of Runes once again for that little bit of bird protection. And the rest of this is like Jeskai mid-range stuff, right? Like you're also playing Underworld Breach Lines. The stacks effect that we talked about earlier don't really affect the Breach Lines. And so you get this Jeskai Breach deck that also just has this horrifying, inevitable bird murder ready for you in the command zone. I was definitely not expecting to see a deck like this sign up for this tournament, but boy howdy is it kind of sick. Most of this deck is literally just like Jeskai tempo pieces, and occasionally you have a piece in here that just says, oh, by the way, this bird will kill you. So yeah, and then you get to play Torpor Orbs and like a bunch of like quirky little stacks effects. You get to play some good cards in general, right? I think the curiosity effects in there are to slap onto Ishai, because with Ka0s, you're able to draw 3 cards off of them. It deals that damage. Yeah, so if you slap a curiosity on Ishai, you can then hit your opponents and draw 3 cards, which is also pretty sick. But yeah, this is definitive murder bird. Anyone who's called the Jessica deck murder bird has not gone as deep into the bird murder as this one for sure. We have Dom FTK with Subscribe to Move to Combat on YouTube. Ecrocrom with this pilot here with this Ecrocrom mid-range deck. They've shown up to a couple of these Chaos tournaments and made the top 16. This is pretty classic 4-color sans white mid-range Crom nonsense. I mean, what you lose when you get rid of Tymna in the command zone and gain green is a bunch of early accelerations, things like ESG into Tinderwall. You get these consistent mana dorks. You get the amazing Culling Ritual, and you get to do some nonsense with crop rotation and a few of these creature tutors that allow you to go get Docksides pretty easily. But even then, like, the creature twos aren't even in this variant of this deck. Like, there's no Invasion of Ikoria, there's no Eldritch Evolution, no Neoform, none of that stuff. It really is just bare minimum green for this list. And this is Grixis with a splash of mold on it. It is really just a very classic Crom mid-range deck. Once again, you trade off that little bit of Tymna value, and by a little bit, I mean decent amount of Tymna value, for this ability to grind with these green cards, right? The crop rotation was what I was kind of looking at here, checking out where the payoffs are for that. And it's mostly just Emergence Zone, I guess, basically becoming a second copy of Born Upon a Wind in this deck. So Crop Rot being able to flash in wins over the top of our opponents. I've been playing a lot of Born Upon a Wind, and it will be present in the deck that I talk about later in this tech. Born has been really, really powerful lately, and definitely a card I am happy to say has really surprised me. It is really, really strong. So having that Crop Rot there for those E-Zone synergies makes a ton of sense. We have Punny Name here with the ever classic I am bad for not playing Dockside. Ironically, the description of this deck is always top 16, never a top 4 for this top 16 deck list. We have Atraxa here. This is pretty classic Atraxa stuff. We have the new Cutsil making the cut in this deck, just adding another Grand Abolisher to this archetype. One of the few things lately that I was like, oh, hey, Atraxa gets a pretty nice buff in another Grand Abolisher effect. But apart from that, this is pretty classic Atraxa stuff. Nothing too crazy. Punny Name has been doing well with Atraxa, basically since its printing. One of the first people to start doing well with Atraxa online. Atraxa is just 4-color mid-range good stuff, right? Actually really surprised to not see Italian in this list. I feel like that's just a pretty free card that allows you to bridge that mid-game to the point where you can actually just hard cast Atraxa. So I'm kind of surprised by that exclusion from this deck. But apart from that, it's a lot of 4-color good stuff for sure. And now we have my deck for this tournament. As I said, came in first in the Swiss and then lost in top 16, meaning 5th place in this tourney. I had never played this deck before this tournament, and actually it came about because I was messing around with Crom Francisco the week beforehand and immediately was like, man, I just want card draw in the command zone. So 3 heads and 1 lot of tentacles equals 1 wacky night. We have Crom and Tavesh Thought. Now, I think a lot of people associate Crom Tavesh with a more turbo ad nauseum strategy, and that is definitely an aspect of this deck. But I noticed that when I was comparing this list to a lot of other Crom Tavesh lists that have done well lately, I was getting close to like 20 cards different between this and most other well-performing Crom Tavesh lists, most notably Sharky, who's been doing really well with that archetype. But I definitely took out a lot of the more like full turbo cards that I found to be like way more productive in decks like Rogsai, and I put them in their place a few more mid-range pieces that I find were really, really helpful for this archetype. So, obviously we have Thoracle Consult lines, Thoracle Tainted Pact. We have Displacer Kitten stuff with Tavesh Displacer plus Tavesh is a 6 synergy and definitely won me several games, not only in this tournament, but since this tournament, as I've just been playing pickup games with folks. Displacer Kitten plus Tavesh has definitely been an extremely powerful synergy in this deck. I actually really like Ledger Shredder. It's a card that has just been doing well lately. I just feel like it maybe was overhyped when it first came out. Then everyone was like, oh, it's not nearly as good as we thought it was. But then now it exists in this in-between space, and it's so resilient against Bowmasters. And in a meta where all of your creatures that provide you incidental value are getting sniped down, a 1/3 to start that only gets bigger is actually pretty sick. I get questions about Notion Thief a lot in some of my decks lately. Basically, I think Notion Thief was being removed from the meta as a bit of an overcorrection to the presence of Bowmasters because people were so aggressively doing the Notion Thief into wheel strategy. But Notion Thief is just good right now. It is good against people who are trying to proactively wheel like Rogsai. It is good against Tymna and Crom trying to passively draw a bunch of cards. It's good against the Talions, against Esper Sentinels, and it's good at just stopping people from sitting behind a Ristic Study and thinking they're safe. I think Notion Thief is actually really decently positioned right now, and I'm very happy to be playing it in the deck. The other thing you'll notice in this version is I'm playing a lot of engines, right? So I have my 4-mana investment in the Notion Thief. I'm playing Talion. I'm also playing the One Ring. So even though I have 2 card advantage engines in the command zone, I'm still happy to play all of the card advantage engines I can get. that was one of the things I enjoyed most about this deck, is that I felt like I could just, play one card advantage engine, sit behind my wall, and then interact with what's happening at the table, and then play my Ka0s out of the command zone, play my Devesh out of the command zone, and suddenly I'm like drawing 3 times as much as the other players at the table, and that stuff was sick. I mean, it's really, really fun. If you are a big fan of like playing that good mid-range Magic where you have just playing card advantage after card advantage, but still having that ability to, not just sit behind all of that and know that you can play cards like Dockside and explode out of nowhere, or you can eventually pivot these things into your win cons, cards like Underworld Breach accordingly. It's really, really nice. I definitely, I'm usually a little lower on Mnemonic Betrayal, but in a deck like this one, I feel like it works pretty well with what we're trying to do. One of the newer spicy pieces I tried with Miss of Lorien. This card has been some highs, some lows since I've tried it, but it's really good at just being able to replicate it a bunch and disrupt what your opponents are doing. It's very, very easy to completely dismantle a board, much like Culling Ritual does with this card. And also, if you really need to target a specific mana value with this card, you can just replicate it targeting another thing of that mana value, right? So if there's, a talisman and an arcane signet out there, and I really want 2's gone, I'm going to put a copy of the spell targeting each of them because I want to make sure at least one copy of that spell resolves. Now, it doesn't stop things like Flusterstorm, but most traditional counter spells will only be able to counter one copy of this spell, and that's where it has a lot of strength. I think one of the other things that is definitely unique to my variant of this list is that I'm going full countertop here, right? I'm playing Counterbalance and Sensei's Divining Top in this archetype. Ka0s is literally one of the best counterbalance commanders, being able to have situations where whenever your opponents cast their second spell, you're able to stack counterbalance triggers either before or after the Ka0s draw, so you're able to control what's on the top of your library pretty effectively. Once again, this list I wanted to slow down a little bit. I wanted to add some more counter magic, some more mid-range pieces, things to actually tempo out the game. And I found it to be really, really powerful. I mean, I was able to go 3-0 in my first couple rounds for this tournament and hadn't lost a game until I got into the top 16. And even then, it was still a very, very good fight, and my deck performed pretty well that I was pretty proud of. So I'm very, very happy with how the deck performed in this top 16. I'm very high on this deck. Also tried out Stubborn Denial in this list, which I really enjoy with Ka0s. I think for anyone looking to pick up this archetype, I'm definitely noticing that I'm leaning towards playing Ka0s first and then playing Devesh as a supplemental piece. I find that if you lead with Devesh, people get a little skeeved out by Devesh itself, which I'm not really sure why there's like a major difference between them, but I think it's more the fact that people can use things like Force of Negation and, other non-creature counter spells on it. So they're more likely to use them, which is a little strange because it's just a card advantage engine, but I know people are going to have opinions on that one for sure. But because I'm leaning Ka0s so much, I really wanted to try Stubborn Denial in this deck, and it came into play once or twice, but I definitely want to test it more before I'm sure that I like it in Ka0s decks. A little bit of main deck hate here in Cursed Totem. I think is really good to be able to break parity on that effect, and I'm not really playing any creatures apart from Doubt the Voidwalker. Doubt the Voidwalker that have activated abilities. Also, Hullbreaker Horror is a thing that really draws me to this deck. I mean, the ability to have this late game, very hard to interact with and very disruptive engine. It allows you to flash it in towards the later part of the game and just start bouncing your rocks, go infinite, and then bounce Devesh over and over again to draw your entire deck. And it's nice to have this like sort of infinite mana, attrition outlet that is not just so easily disrupted like things like Adnos and stuff like that. It's a lot harder to handle Hullbreaker Horror combos than other combos traditionally. Before we head into the top 4 and before we get off my deck list for this tournament, I want to remind you here that we do coaching here on Comedian MTG. And if you would like to receive coaching from the player who has the most top cut results with different deck lists for 2 years in a row, feel free to DM me here. You can email me at comedianmtg@gmail.com. You can find me on Discord or on Twitter and DM me in any of those places. The links for all of those will be down in the description below. The coaching has been such an amazing change in my life, and being able to do that as a full-time thing has made me so happy. I mean, I genuinely love what I do, and I love working with people. And if you're interested in taking that next step up with your cEDH game, you can find me at any of those places. Smalls here with a sick deck, Flash Heliod the Radiant Dawn / Heliod the Warped Eclipse. Timing is everything. Now, I played Smalls in the Swiss of this tournament, and they played amazingly. Like genuinely, there were so many moments where they interacted at the right time. They put me in a situation in which I was looking like I was very likely to win the game, and they almost killed me by making me draw cards into my own Ocean Thief. So genuinely very impressed by playing against this player, and wow, this deck is very, very cool. Blue-White Heliod is a card I absolutely adore, and it's just 100% proof of that concept of like, if you can get a Flash engine online, being able to operate at instant speed is really, really strong. The idea is that you have your Heliod, you get it and you flip it over to its back half, and then suddenly every time your opponents are casting spells, they are reducing the cost of your cards. Now, there's definitely a decent amount of artifacts in the list. You have all of these ramp pieces here, and you see all these 5 mana and 4 mana spells, right? But you have to think about every time your opponents are drawing cards during their turn, they are reducing the cost of these spells. And there are situations where it's not just one opponent, right? The thing that is hard to parse with this card is the fact that Heliod says spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card your opponents have drawn this turn, right? So if one spell is cast and it triggers 2 Rhystic Studies and I drew for turn, that's suddenly a reduction of 3 on all your spells. And that's a very tame example. Suddenly One Ring is 1 mana, Smothering Tithe is 1 mana, Machine God's Effigy is 1 mana, right? There's a bunch of counter spells here. Obviously, any sort of flash deck is going to have that. You have Displacer Kitten combo here. Very reduced, very easy to get a lot of triggers off of Kitten, especially when it comes to having cards like we just noticed, Coveted Jewel here, right? If you get Kitten and Coveted Jewel out, the game's basically over, right? You have crazy cards like Chromatic Orrery, very powerful piece in this deck. You have Sonic Screwdriver, things like untap your ring, add you a bunch of mana. Once again, all these colorless costs don't really add up to a ton. And there's a lot of really cool cards in this deck. Definitely a lot of crazy synergies. You're able to go off and make infinite mana with Hullbreakers and stuff like that. Bounce all of your things that draw you cards. I almost straight up died to a memory jar getting flashed in response to me only having 3 or 4 cards left in my library. This deck is sick and does a lot of crazy stuff. And you look at cards like Memory Jar and you're like, oh, well, it's a symmetrical draw. Why is that good? Turns out when that happens in response to something, I mean, one, you can just be, have Thoracle in the stack with no library and you could die to a Memory Jar or a Prosperity or a Time Twister or Windfall or Echo of Eons. But then also the Heliod player's spells all get reduced by, 20. And turns out they're able to do some pretty nasty stuff when they have a giant mana reduction and flash speed on all of their spells. So this deck is extremely sick. The pilot, as I mentioned, Smalls, was someone who really, really impressed me during the Swiss of this tournament, and I am excited to see if this deck is a flash in the pan or something that keeps happening. Very cool. Schnack to bottom is 17 here with Krark Sakashima Kitten midrange. I played against Schnack and both in the Swiss and the top 16, and they're the player who eliminated me from the top 16, as well as Kai and our Corvul player as well. And so this is Krark Sakashima. The Kitten obviously called out very early in the description of this deck list. Obviously having the Imperial Recruiter, Displacer Kitten, Dockside synergies makes storming a lot easier in this deck. And apart from that, it is Krark Sakashima nonsense, right? You want to get your Krark, you want to get a copy of Krark either through your commander Sakashima or through Veyran or Harmonic Prodigy, or start getting mana after everything succeeds with things like Tavern Scoundrel or Storm-Killed Artist or Archmage Meritus. This is one of those decks that gets a piece and then gets a second piece, and suddenly things are extremely out of hand. This deck is powerful, it continues to be powerful, and it continues to be a deck that you have to respect it at the right times, or else if you miss that window of interaction, you will lose to Krark and Sakashima. That is just an inevitability of playing against this archetype. Congratulations to Schnack, you played Krark Sakashima very impressively throughout this tournament, and definitely did really well. Wow, what a weird deck we have here. This is Tavesh Kodama, Multi-Hulk Midrange by Kimyra. Now, I believe this pilot we were having a conversation earlier in the Swiss, and I believe they said they hadn't played cEDH in like a hot minute and came back for this tournament and had like a last minute decision to play it, and then ended up top 4ing this thing. So absolutely coming out here with a very spicy Tavesh Kodama deck. Kodama decks, I guess, on the bounce back, because this is 2 tournaments we've covered in a recent span of time where Kodama is pretty relevant. This is definitely a Hulk deck, playing some Broodlord lines in here. I'm noticing a lot of stuff that kind of look like that Corvul deck with a lot of crazy sacrifice synergies. I assume there's going to be some altars if I come down here to the artifacts. Yeah, there they go. We have defense grid to protect our own stuff. Is there the Dosen in here as well? Yeah. Oh yeah. So we are fully insulating ourselves so that we can do some creature combo nonsense. And that is definitely what this deck does. So we've got Broodlord lines in here. There's Necropotence, crazy synergies in here. And remember, as soon as you get that Kodama down, the game completely shifts. Kodama is just so insanely powerful at completely changing the pace of the game. And yeah, I don't even know how to describe this stuff other than really, really cool. There's Broodlord stuff, as I mentioned. So there's no Peer into the Abyss. So I'm guessing it has something to do with getting a Broodlord and somehow converting that to getting your Protean Hulk on the battlefield, I take it. I'm not really sure how that happens, but seems pretty sick. Yeah, this is a really, really cool list. And definitely super atypical. If anyone has any insight on like some of the more niche specifics of this deck, please feel free to comment it down below in the comments. I hella respect for this deck because it is super wild, super quirky, and definitely a lot of just like green-black creature combo nonsense. Obviously the clean Hulk pile here. We have Lesser Masticore, Malira, and Disciple of the Vault with a sack outlet, so you'd be able to sacrifice Lesser Masticore. It would come back, attempting to have a -1 counter on it, but Malira would say no thank you. And then every time that goes through, Disciple of the Vault pings opponents for 1 life. So very clean Hulk outlet there in that deck. And yeah, there's just so many crazy cards in here. We've got a ton of value pieces like Plunderer and Yawgmoth and Standard Bearer, and just a lot of crazy sacrifice synergies that apparently can rip you through your deck till you get a Protean Hulk and turn the corner with it. Kind of crazy to not even see like a Grim Monolith in a deck running a 6 mana and 5 mana commander. But yeah, this deck is trying to absolutely explode out the gates. And yeah, I would love just like a full diagnosis on how this deck works. It's pretty sick. Temujin with my secret can't be taught. This is Temujin's Tivit list. Temujin's been doing pretty well on these online tournaments with Tivit, and we played during the Swiss this tournament as well. And yeah, they've been doing pretty well with this deck, as I mentioned. The Displacer Kitten Teferi stuff's in here. We have Containment Priest, which is not in every version of Tivit, but definitely in some of the more controlling versions. Displacer Kitten plus Containment Priest is a little bit of anti-synergy, but that's really the only thing that Containment Priest shuts down in your own deck. We have Dauntless Dismantler here, a new Tivit staple. I think all Tivit pilots will tell you that it's a card that is there to stay, because we loved how Blind Obedience changed the deck, and Dauntless is just a second copy of it. Powerful effect. We have Imposter Mech here, definitely a good value copy. I've seen a lot more players talk about that one. Misdirection's kind of a spicier include here for Tivit, not one that you see quite a lot, and definitely kind of limited in what it can hit. But yeah, this is Tivit mid-range. I mean, genuinely, Tivit's been in a position where it's been not doing as well in the most recent meta, and here we have Temujin saying, no, I think I'll win a whole tournament with this. So congrats to our pilot here for making this win happen with Tivit, and showing us all that Tivit, despite being a little bit worse position than it normally is, can still show up and take down an online tournament. Thank you everybody for watching this video. Make sure to hit like and subscribe while you're here on YouTube if you enjoy content like this. What was your favorite deck from this tournament? I know we actually had a lot of spice in this tournament. It made me really happy to see an online tournament where people coming out and trying new stuff. I was expecting a little more like Ixalan stuff from the cards in that set, especially because it's actually a pretty high power level set, but everyone else said, no, actually we're trying to take a bunch of spice from the past couple months and work on that stuff instead of bringing it to this online tournament. So pretty sick stuff here out of this Treasure Series 8 by Ka0s. Super happy with my run in the tournament. Was super disheartened to be out in the top 16 after feeling really, really good about the Swiss, but Crom Tevesh definitely immediately added itself to my staple of decks. It's very much my play style and really, really fun to play, and a deck I felt very, very good about. So feeling great about this tournament and excited to hear more. Remember, if you guys want to learn more about cEDH coaching, you can email me at comedianmtg@gmail.com, find me on Twitter or at Discord. Once again, everything will be in the description down below for more details on that. Just want to thank everybody for watching this video. Everyone's help is super appreciated. And also, while you're here, make sure to check out Dragonshield. We have a coupon code 10% down below, 10% off your orders. Dragonshield. It's pretty sick. I don't know. I use those sleeves for all my decks, so it's pretty cool place to go, just saying. Without any further ado, I'll catch y'all next time.
Do you lie awake at It's